From the journal, Questions of Philosophy, 1953, number 5, pages 21-38. The Basic Economic Law of Modern Capitalism. The basic economic law of capitalism as a whole, which operated in the era of pre-monopoly capitalism, was discovered by Marx, the founder of scientific communism. This is the law of surplus value, giving, as Engels said, the key to understanding all capitalist production. The law of surplus value reveals the essence of capitalist exploitation, and thereby the economic basis of the class antagonism that is inadmissible within the framework of capitalism and the ever-increasing class antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. This law explains the origin and nature of all types of income of the exploiting classes and groups in bourgeois society: industrial profit, commercial profit, loan interest, land rent. All these types of income, as Marx showed in the third volume of Capital, are nothing but transformed forms of surplus value. Stressing the determining significance of the production of surplus value in the entire capitalist economy, Marx pointed out that the creation of surplus value is the driving soul of capitalist production. The Archive of Marx and Engels, Volume 2, 7, p. 153. However, the law of surplus value, being the general law of capitalism, operating at all stages of development of the capitalist mode of production, does not in itself characterize the specifics of modern, monopoly capitalism. The law of surplus value at different stages of development of capitalism is implemented in various concrete forms. Under pre-monopoly capitalism, it was implemented primarily in the form of ensuring an average profit. In the era of monopoly capitalism, as J.V. Stalin proved, the engine of capitalist production is not average profit and not excess profit, which, as a rule, is only a slight excess over the average profit, but the maximum profit. By concretizing and developing the law of surplus value in relation to the conditions of monopoly capitalism, J.V. Stalin discovered the basic economic law of modern capitalism. The main features and requirements of the basic economic law of modern capitalism, writes J.V. Stalin, could be formulated approximately in this way: ensuring the maximum capitalist profit by exploiting, ruining and impoverishing the majority of the population of the country, by enslaving and systematically robbing the peoples of other countries, especially backward countries. Finally, through wars and militarization of the national economy used to ensure the highest profits. The Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, p. 38. This classical definition, which is a theoretical generalization of modern capitalist reality, reveals both the goal of capitalist production under monopoly capitalism and the means used by monopolies to achieve this goal. The maximum profit represents a special economic category, which differs substantially from the average profit. They differ: 1. According to the recipients; 2. In magnitude; 3. According to sources. The average profit in the epoch of pre-monopoly capitalism was received by every individual capitalist, whose enterprises used the social and normal conditions of production. As for the maximum profit, typical for the era of monopoly capitalism, it is not appropriated by all capitalists, but only by monopoly unions of capitalists. Non-monopolized small and medium-sized capitalist enterprises do not receive maximum profit. Moreover, since monopolies increase their profits also by transferring parts of the surplus value of non-monopolized enterprises in various ways, insofar as the monopolies gain maximum profit leads to a direct reduction in the profits of non-monopolized enterprises. Further, in its size, the maximum profit considerably exceeds the average profit. Bourgeois statistics do not give correct data either about the average rate of profit or about the maximum profit received by capitalist monopolies. However, even the few information available on this issue indicate how much the rate of profit of capitalist monopolies exceeds the average rate of profit. So, in 1929 the rate of return of all U.S. corporations after tax deduction was 6.7%, and the profit rate of 615 large companies, 13.4%. Of course, these figures are greatly underestimated, as capitalist companies, by falsifying their balances, hide considerable profits under the guise of exaggerated depreciation charges and various explicit and secret reserves. However, in this case, not only absolute figures are important to us, but their ratio, and the fact that the profit rate of 615 large companies was twice the rate of profit of all corporations, indicates how much the maximum profit exceeds the average. But this excess will be much more significant if we take not all large corporations, but only the largest monopolistic associations. For example, in 1951 the rate of return in the entire U.S. manufacturing industry, before taxes, was 27.9%, but with DuPont and Niemeyer's receiving 43.3% of return on its capital, General Electric Company 52.8%, and the General Motor Corporation 61.6%. On the other hand, for small and medium-sized companies with assets of up to $250,000, the rate of profit was only 17.2%. Thus, billionaire corporations receive several times the higher rate of profit in comparison with non-monopolized enterprises. Compare with what the largest profits are received by the world's largest monopolies now, in the 21st century. Figures, for example, were quoted by Gazprom as tens of thousands of %. The maximum profit differs from the average not only in quantitative terms, but also in quality. While the average profit in the era of pre-monopoly capitalism was the source of the surplus value created by the labor of wage workers, the maximum profit characteristic of the era of monopoly capitalism is obtained not only through the exploitation of wage workers, but also through the exploitation of small commodity producers as in the capitalist countries themselves, and in the colonial and dependent countries. Thus, if the category average profit expressed the production relationship between the wage worker class and the capitalist class, the category maximum profit expresses relations, first, between the monopoly bourgeoisie and the working class, and secondly, between the monopoly bourgeoisie and small commodity producers within the capitalist countries, and thirdly, between the monopoly capital of the metropolitan countries and the exploited working masses of the colonial and dependent countries. The circumstance that the monopoly bourgeoisie exposes the entire mass of working people to exploitation allows the communist parties to win over to their side the majority of the people. The maximum profit differs from the average profit and the methods of its appropriation. Monopoly capitalism is characterized primarily by the monopoly sale of its goods above their value and the purchase of labor by their monopolies below its value. A characteristic feature of maximum profit is also that it expresses other relationships within the capitalist class than the average profit. While the law of average profit means the equation of the rate of profit for the capitalists of all branches of production, the law of maximum profit, on the contrary, places the various capitalists in an unequal position, since it presupposes a distribution of surplus value within the capitalist class in favor of monopolists and to the detriment of non-monopolized enterprises. It would be wrong to consider that with the emergence of the law of maximum profit, the law of average profit ceases to operate. Lenin pointed out that monopoly capitalism is a superstructure over the old capitalism of the era of free competition. The laws peculiar to capitalism in general do not cease to operate even in the era of monopoly capitalism. The question of exactly how the law of average profit operates under monopolistic capitalism requires special development and goes beyond the scope of this article. Significantly differing from the average profit, the maximum profit at the same time differs from the usual super profits that were obtained even in the era of pre-monopoly capitalism. A typical method of obtaining super profits is the improvement of technology in individual capitalist enterprises, leading to an increase in the degree of exploitation of workers in these enterprises. As a result of technological improvements in individual enterprises, capitalist individual value products in these facilities is reduced compared to the public value of the same goods, and the difference between the public and the individual value is assigned to individual capitalists as surplus or excess super profit. 2. At the same time, they receive super profits only temporarily, as long as their enterprises outstrip other enterprises of this industry by their technical equipment and, consequently, by the level of labor productivity. In contrast, from excess profits, the maximum profit is not a short-term phenomenon, but a long one, of course, and the maximum profit is not a constant, because it is subject to spontaneous fluctuations, in particular, due to the change in industrial upheavals by crises and depressions. Nevertheless, compared to the profit of non-monopolized enterprises, it always stands at a much higher level. The concept of maximum profit as the engine of modern capitalist production has a certain content. The maximum profit is not just the largest profit. Every capitalist at all times tends to get exactly the greatest profit. In the work of The Theory of Surplus Value and other works, Marx emphasized that the aim of capitalist production is always to create a maximum of surplus value with a minimum of advanced capital. It is in the pursuit of the greatest profit that capitalists extract capital from industries with a low rate of profit and invest them in industries with a high rate of profit. However, this overflow of capital objectively, regardless of the will and desires of the capitalists, leads to the formation of an average rate of profit. Along with intersectoral competition, which manifests itself in the flow of capital from one industry to another, there is also intra-industry competition. Individual capitalists, in pursuit of the greatest profit, introduce technical improvements at their enterprises, increase the organic composition of their capital. But, since all the capitalists operate in the same direction, the objective result is an increase in the organic composition of the aggregate social capital, and this, in turn, generates a tendency to lower the average rate of profit. Monopoly capitalism differs from the pre-monopoly one in that it is precisely the maximum profit, as profit that exceeds not only the average profit, but also super profits, that is becoming an economic need for it. The point is not that the movers of modern monopoly capitalism are striving for maximum profit, but that the appropriation of maximum profit is an objective necessity, an indispensable condition for expanded reproduction. Why is it necessary to maximize profits for the implementation of more or less regular expanded reproduction under conditions of monopoly capitalism, whereas in the era of pre-monopoly capitalism, was the average profit sufficient for this? A characteristic feature of monopoly capitalism is the concentration of production in large and gigantic capitalist enterprises. 3. With a huge amount of all capital placed in large enterprises, they have a very high proportion of fixed capital invested in machinery and equipment, factory buildings and structures. With the faster growth of constant capital compared to the variable, the part of constant capital that is embodied in the main capital grows most rapidly. So, for example, in the American industry for the period from 1899 to 1929, the cost of consumed raw materials increased by 5.9 times, whereas the cost of machine wear was 10.4 times. But the more all the capital functioning in the enterprises, and the more, in particular, the fixed capital, the greater the additional, in comparison with the previously functioning capital is required for expanded reproduction. As Marx pointed out, the proportions in which the process of production can be expanded are determined not arbitrarily, but are prescribed by technology. Capital. 2. p. 74, 1949. With a high level of technology, large additional capital is required for large-scale reproduction in large capitalist enterprises, and therefore not every profit is sufficient for extended reproduction. The need for large additional investments of capital is also due to the fact that with the rapid development of technology very soon the moral wear and tear of old equipment will come, as a result of which the capitalists often have to renew their fixed assets long before its physical wear and tear, and this update usually accompanies the increase in the total amount of functioning capital. True, in the era of monopoly capitalism, the opposite tendency also works. Monopolies investing large capital in the equipment of their enterprises and fearing the loss of some of these capitals in the event of equipment renewal before the expiration of its physical fitness inhibit the renewal of fixed capital, thus delaying the development of science and technology. RP Prox. Nevertheless, competition, which in the era of monopoly capitalism not only does not stop but, on the contrary, it intensifies, makes from time to time to update the fixed assets affected by obsolescence. If even very large capitals are required to expand existing enterprises with high technology, even more significant capital is needed to organize new enterprises. In his work, Imperialism as the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin cites the following words of G. Levy, the author of a special study on monopolies in England. Concentration led to the fact that the company had to spend huge sums of capital, so new enterprises are facing ever higher demands in terms of the size of the necessary capital, and this makes their appearance more difficult. Works of T22, p. 187. Including, and therefore they are not built as actively as they were built before. RP comment. Thus, in the conditions of monopoly capitalism, for enlarged reproduction, it is necessary to invest in the enterprises very significant additional capital. Meanwhile, as the organic composition of capital grows, the average rate of profit decreases. If the expanded reproduction was carried out only at the expense of the average profit, then the possibilities for increasing production would increasingly decrease. Still Marx, noting that, with the decrease in the rate of profit, the rate of accumulation also decreases, pointed out, since the rate of increase in the value of all capital, the rate of profit, serves as an incentive to capitalist production, just as the increase in the cost of capital serves its sole purpose. Profit slows down the formation of new independent capitals and thus threatens the development of the capitalist production process. Capital. T3, pages 251-252. An important factor in lowering the rate of accumulation in conditions of monopoly capitalism is the increasing unproductive use of national income. With the growth of parasitism and the decay of capitalism, an increasing share of the national income is expended both on unproductive consumption by the capitalists themselves and their numerous parasitic servants, and on covering various unproductive expenditures, the costs of maintaining an increasingly swelling trade apparatus. Advertising expenditures, increasing with exacerbation of competition between capitalists, the cost of maintaining a parasitic bourgeois state apparatus, and so on. Finally, the rate of accumulation is lower as a result of the fact that economic conditions in the conditions of monopoly capitalism are becoming more frequent, the economic crises are becoming more acute and prolonged, during which the accumulation of capital is replaced by a sharp decline in production. An illustration of the decline in the rate of accumulation can be the fact that the share of accumulation in the national income of the United States was in 1889-1898 on average 16.2%, in 1919-1928, 10.2%, and in 1929-1938, only 1.4%. In England, the share of new investment in national income was 12.2% in 1907, in 1924-8 period 1%, in 1935, 6.9%. Thus, on the one hand, the colossal concentration of production, the high level of technology and the large share of fixed capital subject to rapid moral depreciation lead to the need for large-scale additional capital to be invested in enterprises for expanded reproduction, and, on the other hand, as a result of growth parasitism and the decay of capitalism, the unproductive use of surplus value and of all national income increases. Due to these conditions, To ensure more or less regular extended reproduction in the era of monopoly capitalism, it is no longer necessary to average profit, but maximum profit. It would, of course, be wrong to believe that capitalist monopolies are striving to obtain maximum profits in the name of expanded reproduction. The purpose of monopolies is not the growth of production as such, namely, the appropriation of maximum profit. However, regardless of the motives that govern the activity of the capitalists, more or less regular implementation of expanded reproduction is an objective necessity. The competitive struggle forces the capitalists to expand production, since every capitalist who ceased to expand his enterprise would inevitably have been superseded by more powerful competitors and would have lost his capital. As Marx points out, the development of capitalist production makes a constant increase in the investment invested in an industrial enterprise by necessity, and competition imposes on each individual capitalist the immanent laws of the capitalist mode of production as external compulsory laws. It forces it to constantly expand its capital in order to preserve it, and it can expand its capital only through progressive accumulation. Capital, Volume I, p. 597. The necessity of maximum profit for the realization of more or less regular extended reproduction does not at all mean that extended reproduction under monopolistic capitalism conditions always takes place. Under capitalism, in general, expanded reproduction does not have a continuous character, since capitalist production develops cyclically, and the growth of production during periods of industrial upsurge is interrupted by economic crises. In the era of monopoly capitalism, this intermittent nature of the development of capitalist production is further intensified, and the crises of overproduction, leading to the decline of production and the destruction of the productive forces of society, are becoming more frequent and exacerbated. The greatest duration, depth and severity of economic crises are characterized during the general crisis of capitalism, which significantly contributes to slowing the average pace of expanded reproduction. However, the slowdown in production growth does not mean that expanded reproduction ceases to be an objective necessity and completely ceases. Even at the present stage of the general crisis of capitalism, when the productive forces of capitalism as a whole are treading on the ground and when the possibilities for the growth of capitalist production severely narrow because of the disintegration of the single world market and the reduction in the sphere of application of the forces of the major capitalist countries to world resources, the cyclical nature of the development of capitalism is growth and reduction in production, must still be preserved. Although in modern conditions, production growth in these countries will occur on a narrow basis, since production in these countries will be reduced. Stalin, Economic Problems of Socialism of the Former USSR, p. 56.